This is Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We are here today with Joan Almon, who is with the Alliance for Childhood. Good morning, Joan.
Good morning, Daria. It's lovely to be with you.
Thank you. Joan I'm going to have her explain a little bit of her background and what the Alliance for Childhood is all about. Will you give us that, Joan, please?
Surely. I began my work in the early 70s as a kindergarten teacher and then discovered a kind of education that's called Waldorf education and became very interested in that. Worked as a Waldorf kindergarten teacher all through the 70s and 80s and became very concerned about the declining health that I saw in children here in North America. And then, because I was also working internationally, I began to see the same patterns developing in Europe. And now I've also been traveling to Asia and Africa and other parts of the world and see the same patterns developing everywhere in the world. It was just, unfortunately, we pioneered it here. And so in the 90s, I began working with non-Waldorf people as well, who were very concerned about this decline of health in children. And out of this working together, we decided to form an organization called the Alliance for Childhood, which is a partnership of doctors, professors, teachers, parents, social workers, all kinds of people who are advocates for a healthy childhood, working together to identify the problems and the underlying causes and then work for social change.
I now know why Doug Sloan wanted me to contact you. It seems that we are much in alignment with our thinking.
Oh, great.
Can you define for us what decline in health means to you?
Surely. We've seen a certain pattern in these last 3 decades, and I would describe it in a general way as follows, that in the 70s we saw growing stress and nervousness in children. And you may remember David Elkind's book, The Hurried Child, which for me was one of the first books that identified the problem. And he says there and in his subsequent books that as a clinical psychologist, he was seeing more and more children coming into his practice suffering from stress. And he makes the point that if we don't change the lifestyle that's causing this stress, then the stress will go deeper and deeper into the child's being and affect their overall health. So in the 70s, mostly people were talking about children getting very nervous, very thin-skinned, and just generally stressed. And then in the 80s, we were seeing more and more signs of asthma and allergies in children, which seemed to be a next level of the problem. And in the 90s, of course, it's been hyperactivity that's been the big problem, but also depression. And now, as we go into this next decade, one is hearing already more and more about autism increasing in children and also violence increasing in children.
What do you attribute to these different factors that you alluded to here? Let's go with nervousness and stress in the 70s, allergies. And what brought about these things that we face?
Well, I think there's actually a number of factors that have contributed to it. It isn't just one thing. But what we've seen is if a child is basically very healthy and they have one stress factor in their life, they can cope with that. But if they have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, it just seems to overpower their system. So I could mention some of what we consider to be the underlying factors.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, one of them is that home life itself has become a very stressed thing for many children. It's rare now to find a home where everybody's feeling relaxed, where people have lovely meal times together, where parents and children spend a lot of positive time together in conversation and in activities. The home has become a very different thing. And just one little part of it is that children already starting in the preschool years are often in preschool or in child care and then being dashed off to one activity after another in the afternoons. And there was an article last month in a British magazine talking about the pajama defense, which is young children coming home from school and putting on their pajamas because they don't want to go out of the house again. They've just sort of had it with too much activity. So that's just one picture of children in stress, is the family life. In addition, many, many families now are relying on child care from infancy or early childhood onwards. And unfortunately, in this country especially, the quality of child care is not good. And the amount of turnover of personnel in child care is often very, very high. So just when children most need warmth and nurture and long-term relations, they're getting a turnover rate that's considered second only to dishwashers as a profession. And that's just not adequate for children. It's estimated in this country that only about 10% of child care is really good quality child care.
And I won't even discuss the level of intelligence when you're hiring people at minimum wage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, minimum wage is just outrageous for child care. And so the whole valuing of early childhood and care of young children has to be increased. Then the amount of exposure to electronic entertainment is huge for children today. The average American child watches 3 to 5 hours of television, and now added on to that are hours spent in front of computers or watching video, entertainment. Again, just recently there was an article where a psychologist was quoted as working with 2 3-year-olds who were spending 14 hours a day playing computer games.
Wow.
That's just impossible,
wow.
Right? And clearly that's very extreme. But even on a much more moderate level, these things have a huge impact on children. They interfere with the child's own capacities for creativity and play and social interaction. There's also an enormous amount of commercialism being directed at children today, so that children are growing up with the sense that they're not valued for themselves as human beings, as individuals, but more and more are being viewed as consumers. And the merchandising and the manufacturers are quite frank in their own trade magazines that they need to get these children as customers by age 5 or 6, and then they'll have them as faithful consumers for a lifetime. So they are going all out after young children as consumers today. Also, on one side, we're extremely grateful for the advances in medicine and the health of children, and at the same time, we see that medicine today is being overused in some areas of childhood. The amount of antibiotics, for instance, that are prescribed for children. Only in the last couple of years has there been a sort of outcry against this, as doctors have seen that when the children really need antibiotics, often they're immune to them and can't make good use of them because of overuse. And also, we tend to immunize children far more in this country than any other country, and give them multiple immunizations that their immune system can't seem to deal with. So that's been linked to problems of autism, for one thing, and as well as other kinds of nervous disabilities. And the nutrition here is quite poor for children, with the emphasis on junk food, sugar, food additives, and so on. And these have quite a profound effect on some children. And then in addition, you have all the severe problems connected with poverty, neglect, and abuse. So these are the different underlying factors that we see, in some cases, quite rampant in children's lives. And as I said, often a child can cope with 1 or 2 of these things, but most children have 3 or 4 or 5 of these things happening, and it's just more than their nervous system can deal with.
So we're overstimulating our children, which is why they're...
We are overstimulating our children. They are under stress.
Autism and violence are definitely... Autism is a reflection of overstimulation and a child's need to withdraw because of overstimulation, and violence has its roots in the inability to bond, and the relationship that mothers have with their children has not enabled them to have that bonding take place at early years when it needs to, especially at birth with our birthing practices in America.
Yeah, that is a big consideration in all of this. That's right.
So we are literally creating what you are saying.
That's right. These are illnesses that we have created. And that's a tragic thing to say. And at the same time, the good part of it is that these are illnesses that we could change by changing our attitudes about children and changing the lifestyle that we're creating for children.
Most parents think one of the areas you talked about is the fact that children don't get any time to breathe. They come out of school and then go into sports or cheerleading or something, dance lessons, music lessons. Parents attempt to keep them busy to try to keep them out of trouble, and what you're saying is that they need a breather. They need to take a break.
That's right. Children need quite a bit of downtime, so to speak, that they can fill with their own ideas, their own creativity. If we take that time away from them, we really are basically saying, you don't have the inner resources that you need for life. We have to fill every nook and cranny of your being with activity because you don't really have what it takes to guide yourself through life. So it creates stress in childhood, but I'm afraid long-term it creates huge problems for children as they grow up because they don't trust themselves. They're afraid to be alone with themselves. They have to be surrounded by music or other stimulation all the time because they don't feel that they have within themselves what they need, as resources for life.
Well, when you consider that parents are now we're in the hurry-up society.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the society where this is the information age, where information is cutting at us all the time with factoids. I mean, you can't even go to the movie theater or anywhere, baseball game, without a factoid up on the screen. So our culture has created this hurry-up society, and I've known David Elkind for years. What can we do to alleviate the problems, these stress problems, and the spiraling health of our children? What kinds of things would you consider that we do?
Well, I think the first thing for parents and educators and others working with children to do is really just stop and think about all of this and ask ourselves how we got onto such a treadmill to begin with. I know it was kind of a shock to me when I really began looking at research to realize there was no research to support any of the modern trends, such as early academics, for instance, which has been a major source of stress for young children. There just isn't any research. So
that's absolutely correct, by the way.
Yeah, and so it's partly, a question of our stopping and saying, wait a minute, where did I get the idea that young children need so much stimulation? And begin to, to do some self-examination. For me, at least that's always the first step, and not only to rely on what other people are saying, but kind of get back in touch with my own good sense about things. And I think parents have a lot of good sense, and they certainly have a deep love for their children. Most of this has come out of good intentions, but misguided ones. So I think as parents begin to examine their own values and their own experiences, I've had this sense that parents sort of have blinders on, and as those blinders drop, they suddenly see what actually is happening before their eyes with their children, and that's the beginning of finding the courage for change.
You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Darya Brzezinski. We are here today with Joan Almon, who is with the Alliance for Childhood. You can reach us toll-free, 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PRO-KIDS, or email us at prokids@rlc.net. Joan, where is the Alliance for Childhood located?
Our offices are in College Park, Maryland, just outside Washington. And actually, that sounds rather grand, but our office is in my home at the moment, and that's where I live. And then we have some part-time staff who also work out of their own homes here in the area.
Is there a number for the Alliance for Childhood?
There is. We have an 888 number, and that is, 888-878-2772, or 301-699-9058.
We are talking to her about the research and the information that she has regarding the Alliance for Childhood. Now, how does the Alliance work to counter the problems that we have been discussing, the downward spiral of health of our children?
Well, one of the ways that we work is to try to spotlight the problems and the full set of problems and conditions so that people aren't working in a vacuum about this, that they're aware of the problems, they're aware of the various factors that contribute to these health problems of children. And then we work more specifically with the medical community or the educational community, the parenting community, around the things that each one can do regarding different problems. Now, mind you, we're only a year old, so we're just at the beginning of our process. But already in this year, we've been focusing, for example, on the impact of computers on children, and have begun publicizing the problems connected with computer usage in children. and will be targeting the educational community and the health community especially, as well as the legislative community around these issues. The next couple months it will be a very busy time for us on this whole question of computers and children.
Where do you publicize your work?
We had an article that came out on a website newsletter last December, and through that it got picked up by the New York Times online edition.
What was the website?
Well, the website it's a little bit complicated, but I'm glad to give it because it's got a lot of information about the Alliance and its computer project on it. So it's www.O'Reilly, O-R-E-I-L-L-Y, whoopsie, I better get this in front of me. I've been away for the last month, and I used to have this at my fingertips. O'Reilly.com / a tilde, which is a little curvy thing in the upper left-hand part of one's keyboard, Steve T, S-T-E-V-E-T, / Alliance. And Steve T is Steve Talbot, who's an Alliance partner, and he has pulled together a lot of our material that we have out so far on this issue of computers, including the New York Times article, Christian Science Monitor article, a Boston Globe article, and some other articles that have appeared. So it's a good place to go to see all of that material, which also will soon be on our own website that we're just now setting up, which will go under the name of Alliance for Childhood, all one word, .net. So within the next few weeks, I hope people can go to our website and find all of this quite easily.
Who are some of your Alliance members?
Some of the partners include, for instance, Jane Healey, who's well known for her books, The Endangered Mind and Failure to Compute. Douglas Sloan, whom you mentioned, from Columbia University, Teachers College. John Taylor Gatto, who was elected Teacher of the Year in New York about 5 times, and is now quite an outspoken critic of public education. There's quite a wide array. Ed Miller, who was former editor of the Harvard Education Letter, and is a freelance writer and researcher in educational issues. Kate Moody, who wrote a wonderful book about the problems of television in children about 10 years ago, and now is a specialist at the University of Texas Medical School in Galveston on learning disabilities in children.
Do you have a mailing address?
We do. It's Post Office Box 444, College Park, Maryland, 20741.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you concerned about let's talk about computers, for example, and I know Doug's thinking on this. One of my partners is also Joseph Chilton Pierce. So,
oh, yeah.
What is and I know Jane Healey's book.
Mm-hmm.
What do you consider the impact, why do you consider the impact of computers your first project and priority?
Well, we took it on as a first project for a few reasons. One is that there's really only one other group we knew of that was speaking out against computers and children. And there are so many voices speaking in favor that we felt that the situation was quite imbalanced and it needed another strong voice to help point out the problems that children were facing today. So that was one reason that we took it on. The other reason is that, we consider television equally destructive in the lives of children or equally harmful. But television is now quite entrenched, and it's going to take quite a while to get people to really sort of wake up and understand its impact on children. Television is newer, and computers are newer, and we felt there was still a window of time before it became fully entrenched in homes and schools, like television has become, and that this was the moment to really be talking about this issue with parents, as well as with educators.
Now, you have what kinds of publication and conferences do you have coming up?
We have a series of conferences coming up this spring in New York City at Columbia University, for instance, April 29th, where Jane Healey will be together with Alison Armstrong, who has written quite a fine book about computers and children called The Child and the Machine. And the U.S. publication of that will come out May 1st. So we've organized a series of conferences in New York and in California with Allison and then a number of other authors at different sites. And so in May we'll be out in California in the San Francisco area May 6th and in Los Angeles May 13th and a few other places in between.
Allison, Children in the Machine was written by who?
The Child in the Machine is written by Allison Armstrong and Charles Casement, and they are both Canadians. So their book first came out in Canada about 2 years ago, and was
I think I knew the name. I heard the name of this title before, and I just vaguely now I know why it was in Canada. That's what it was.
Yeah, and it's been quite well received and strongly received in Canada, but they were having quite a bit of difficulty finding a U.S. publisher because their message is not such a popular one in the U.S. at the moment, which is that the research and experience is showing that there's a lot of problems connected with computers and children at the kindergarten and elementary level. Problems so big that one really should not be bringing these into the lives of children at this time.
And we have traditionally allowed corporate America into our classrooms from a very long time ago.
That's right.
Without any data stating the positive or the negatives about whether or not bringing those particular technologies in or opinions and pieces of information are detrimental or not to our children.
Yes.
And on the one hand, I'm thinking of the multi-billion-dollar marketing campaign by the Dairy and Cattlemen's Association in the late 1940s and early 50s that told us all we needed to eat cattle products 3 times a day and drink milk. And there was absolutely no premise for that. And now we're finding we have an overweight America and are wondering why. But why do you focus on the importance of play and creativity in childhood?
Well, again and again we've seen this is sort of the bread and butter of childhood, one could say. For children to be playful and creative makes a huge difference. And one of the individuals that I met this year through the Alliance work is a man named Stuart Brown, and I just would like to tell you a little bit about his research because it's quite fascinating. He has a group called the Play Institute based on what he learned as a medical doctor about the importance of play. And what he learned back in the 60s was that he was involved in research about the lives of men who were in prison as murderers. And he found consistently that they had no history of play in their life. And he then did a comparable study of people who won the MacArthur Genius Awards. And he found, again, consistently that they had a strong history of play in their childhood, adolescence, adulthood. So he became very interested in this whole question of the importance of play in our lives for our own well-being as well as the social implications of play. And about 10 years ago gave up his medical practice to found this group called the Play Institute, which furthers research on play. And he has just received a large grant to do 3 PBS specials about play that will come out this summer, as well as a book. So your listeners...
Oh, I didn't know that. I know Stuart Brown.
Stuart Brown, wonderful man, very playful, very creative.
Oh, yes.
Really excellent.
And he is also connected with Michael Mendiza and Touch the Future.
Oh, yes.
I
mention that.
Yeah, Michael is one of my partners, too.
Oh, yeah. Great.
And they have a video out now on play, the intelligence of play. So if any of our listeners would like to find out about the video, you can call us at 877-PRO-KIDS, that's 877-PRO-KIDS, or email us at prokids@rlc.net. That's prokids@rlc.net to find out about any of the points that we've brought up today. Michael Mendiza has a magazine called Touch the Future and a catalog of videotapes, one of which is The Intelligence of Play, where Stuart Brown is featured on the videotape. And the importance of play is very critical in terms of the brain research. Is that not correct?
That is correct. I know it a little bit more indirectly, and that is through the research of children's play itself, which shows it to be strongly linked with language acquisition and social skills. So I have to say that I've heard references to the play and the brain research, but I haven't followed that track with it so much as I have this other. That, for example, an Israeli professor, Sarah Smilansky, did a lot of research on children's play and saw that the children who were most able in the kindergarten to engage in what she called socio-dramatic play, that is make-believe play with other children, sustained over 30 minutes or more, these were children who showed the greatest gains in language usage and understanding language from others, subtly understanding what other people mean, and being less aggressive towards others. And I think that then links with Stuart Brown's research about how children who play well will grow up to be much less aggressive and violent.
Was Stuart Brown the one who played with dolphins and wolves? Was he the one?
He did do that. He went out with the people who were real specialists in those areas and spent time with them, playing in nature with different animals, and has worked closely with Jane Goodall also in her work with chimpanzees.
Are there positive qualities you can see in today's children and youth?
Oh, yes. I see wonderful qualities in today's children and youth. They are a deeply caring generation that is caring about the earth, about animals, about human beings. On college campuses, for instance, today, well over half of the students are actively engaged in volunteer work, either in environmental issues or working for the poor. And this didn't exist so strongly in the last generation. And one has to give this young generation tremendous credit for the qualities that they have. What's now called Generation X, because people didn't really understand them as teenagers. They didn't know it was sort of a mystery generation. Now the press is saying, oh, now we know what X stands for. It stands for excellent and extraordinary. Or in Britain, there was an article about Generation I as being idealistic and individualistic and imaginative. So, we're all seeing some really outstanding qualities in today's children and youth and young adults. And it just makes it doubly hard that they are being so under assault from all of these different social pressures, which makes it very hard for them to bring their wonderful qualities fully to the fore. And I feel that's kind of half of the motivation with the Alliance, is to give these young people a real chance to bring their gifts forward.
You have been listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Darya Brzezinski. We are here today with Jane Almon, who's here with the Alliance for Children. And the Alliance can be called at toll-free 888-878-2772. That's 888-878-2772. If you'd like to reach us here at Children Come First, you may call us toll-free 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS. Or you can email us at PROKIDS@RLC.net. That's PROKIDS@RLC.net. We're going to take a little break and allow our sponsors to talk a little while we come back for our second half hour with Joan Almon of the Alliance for Children, talking about the spiraling health of the children of America. So please stay tuned. On our second half hour, we will be meeting with Jane Healey. Jane is the author of Endangered Minds, Why Our Children Don't Think, and her new book, Failure to Connect, How Computers Affect Our Children's Minds for Better or for Worse. Hello, Jane. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Thank you for being with us today. Let's talk a little bit about your first book to give people an idea about where you're coming from. What is Endangered Minds all about? Why Our Children Don't Think?
Actually, my first book is called Your Child's Growing Mind. It's about brain development and learning. But Endangered Minds, I wrote as a result of really two fields of my own experience coming together. I'm an educational psychologist, and I've been very interested in brain development and learning, and especially as it applies for teachers and parents and what we can do to make it practical. At the same time, I've always been a teacher working with some aged children or graduate students or teachers or somebody or other. And what I noticed about 10 years ago, or maybe 12, was that kids' mental habits and their types of intelligence seem to be changing. And teachers were complaining they can't pay attention, they can't read, they don't understand what they read, they can't express themselves very well. And really, it seemed to be getting worse and worse, to the point where they would even say, well, these kids can't even solve a problem. They don't have any stick-to-itiveness. And at the same time, I was hearing a lot of information from the neurosciences about how the brain is developed all the way through a lifetime and how it really is changed a lot by whatever environment it's in and what it does with the brain, what the brain basically does as the child and the adolescent are growing up. And this suddenly came together for me, and I said, you know what? These kids have got different brains. And my publisher is the one who put the title Endangered Minds on it. My actual title was Changing Brains, but, whatever. And Endangered Minds is basically about what is happening to kids as a function of several different things. One, of course, is the media, television, and now, of course, the computer games and software, which is oftentimes even worse than the TV, a lack of interaction with parents and other adults who teach children how to solve problems and model speaking intelligently, and the kids basically are growing up without a lot of language experience. They're looking instead of listening. People aren't taking the time to read to them. It's a very fast-paced culture, and also that's the other part of it, is they're just being rushed around from one activity and one stimulus and one exciting toy to another. And I put this all together and said, you know what, this has profound implications for parents, for educators, and we need to, first of all, understand what's happening and not blame the kids and not just keep saying, well, the ADD is getting higher and higher, the learning disabilities are going higher and higher, kids can't learn, they won't try. That's a foolish approach. And on the other hand, I don't think we want to give up the habits of reading and speaking intelligently and understanding what other people say, or having some really intense problem-solving skills. So I think together, the reason Endangered Minds has done so well as a book is that it really hit a nerve, and so many teachers and parents had been seeing this, and this book tries to tell them what to do about it.
What do you suggest are the solutions?
Well, I think first we need to understand that the world is changing, kids are changing, what they're exposed to is changing. And the first step we need to take is to ask ourselves, wait a minute, what is right for children? Because you see, now we have this huge computer craze, and that's about the only word that really describes it. It's an absolutely nonsensical notion that everybody seems to have gotten, thanks to a lot of advertising money, that the computers are going to make kids smarter, that suddenly this is going to be the solution to all our educational problems and what have you. And I think we haven't really stopped to consider what kids really need, which is a lot of one-on-one from a concerned adult, lots of spontaneous imaginative play, lots of really deep, engaging problem-solving activities in the three-dimensional world. And, computers for sure when the time is right, but there's a whole lot to think about before we just dump this technology into children's lives and add one more distracting stimulation and add a whole bunch new problems from the kids. So that's what my new book is about, Failure to Connect, How Computers Affect Children's Minds and What We Can Do About It. And the failure to connect is really with the potential of this technology to do it right, and it's also the failure to understand what kids need. So that's really step one. Step two is to say, hey, wait a minute, we're going to have to move a little in education. We're going to have to realize that new kinds of skills are going to be required in the next century. Let's really get down to it, or this, which is now this century, let's really get down to it and say, how do we teach these kids to be deep, intelligent problem solvers who can deal with some of these huge issues that are going to be confronting them? And really that's what my work has focused on, is thinking what we can do, and certainly at home, parents can work with their kids just on quiet projects to show them how to focus, to show them how to concentrate, turn off the electronics, get back to the three-dimensional world, which is really forward to the three-dimensional world, because these are the skills that are going to be desperately needed as we move farther into technology. The other thing is, in schools and homes, a lot of language in children's lives. It's such a big part of thinking. It's such a big part of your intelligence quotient. It's such a big part of the way you get along with people. That kids really need a lot of people to talk to, and they need an opportunity to express themselves. And a necessity to express themselves, not just sit there and push buttons on some electronic game or toy or even something that comes in the name of learning. So obviously, I have a lot of ideas. Probably you have some questions.
No, you're doing well, actually. So the computer then, where a child is sitting in front of the computer, we're in an age now where everybody thinks this is, the earlier they get it, the better off they'll be. And so what are you saying are and of course we're also in a society where parents are in a hurry, and mother and dad are both working, and everybody's in a hurry to to go over everywhere and do nothing. But how can you change the mindset of people who think the computer are the answers for our children in terms of learning?
Well, it's very hard, but by the way, I have been a working mother forever, and I'm now a working grandmother. So, I definitely relate to the fact that it's wonderful to have a calming video at the end of the day for a 5-year-old child, and and that many, by the way, of the educational applications which are in the tubes and will be along for kids in middle school and high school are really great on computers. So it isn't just that we need to throw computer technology out. It's that there are several questions we need to ask. And first, we need to ask about the physical health risks of all of these things. Both television and computers involve a lot of sedentary time, and kids are having problems, not only obesity, which we read about a lot, but also problems in coordination, in sensory motor integration, in perceptual skills that are vital, parts of intelligence that are being shortchanged because they're getting on the screens too soon, and it's two-dimensional, and it stimulates these systems in the wrong ways. Okay, some of it may be okay, but we really need to take a strong look at this. Also, in terms of physical health, there are vision issues, there are issues about carpal tunnel syndrome. So, all of these are really putting our kids at risk, in the name of making them smarter, but it isn't making them smarter because there's no research, really, especially for young children. There's nothing that indicates that this is going to make kids any better at school or any smarter. Now, there are isolated instances where a child working with an adult, we can see some real progress with some kinds of this technology. And television can be a very educational experience if the child sits and watches it with the parents and they talk about it and they get into some kind of a meaningful dialogue about what's going on, or, issues that might be discussed. All of these things have great potential, but we have to look at the age of the child. This is one of the many things that haven't been answered properly. There's a big manufacturer's industry push to get parents to buy this stuff for preschoolers, even babies, which is nonsense. It really can be very damaging. And we have to think about what is right for the little ones as opposed to what's right for a 3-year-old is what's opposed to what's right for a 13-year-old are very, very different in terms of the growing brain and in terms of education, and also in terms of social issues. So we've got to remember that there have to be adults in control of this. We shouldn't be sending a kid off to his room with a computer, for example, until probably late adolescence. Even then, we have to be sure that he is able to use it responsibly, because there are many, many horror stories coming out about, first of all, overuse, way too many hours spent on this, and secondly, addiction, and thirdly, getting onto places, naturally, I think everybody's aware of this, where they shouldn't go. So, we need parent and teacher involvement. We need discretion in what age group we're going to give this to and what kinds of applications we're going to use with every age group. And we certainly need more understanding of kids' real needs, which are much more, frankly, fundamentally social and emotional needs than just having a lot of knowledge or information pushed at them. Data isn't going to make your kids smart, and it isn't going to help your kids get ahead in the world. And it isn't going to have your students become good thinkers when they get to university level. What is are deep and reflective and meaningful thinking, learning, and problem-solving activities that kids engage in, and they may involve computers or they may not. But we just need to fundamentally rethink the whole system, frankly.
You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Darya Brzezinski, and we're here today with Jane Healey, author of Endangered Minds, Why Our Children Don't Think, and Failure to Connect, How Computers Affect Our Children's Minds for Better or for Worse. You can call us for information at our toll-free number at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS, or you can email us at prokids, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. Now, Jane, there were a couple of issues you talked about. How does the computer, tell us about brain dysfunction. How does sitting in front of the computer and the television create this dysfunction in our brains?
Well, I didn't actually ever use the word dysfunction, although some neurologists are suspecting that that may be the case. The problem is, you see, we really don't have good research on this. What I would suggest, and I think it's strongly supported by research, is that every environmental stimulus that the child spends a lot of time with is going to have effects on that growing brain. And the more involved the child is, and obviously the more hours he or she spends with it, the more of an effect it's going to have. At the same time, we know that there are critical or sensitive periods during development for certain kinds of very important skills, such as language, the ability to express yourself well and get along socially with language and to think with language. And if those activities are neglected because the child is glued to some kind of a screen, what you're going to have, which is a brain which, we might not want to use the word dysfunctional, but it may not be functioning as we would like it to. It may not be functioning as well as it might have in that area. In other words, if the child goes through early life with very little language experience, he may end up with a compromised language system. And, he gets to school and he goes through school and suddenly everybody wonders why he's got a serious problem. If they spend too much of their time with bad software, of which much of what comes in the name of education is frankly terrible, the child is used to pushing a few buttons for some easy task, getting a reward, having fun, seeing lots of games and funny things pop up on the screen. He gets to a math test and suddenly the problem looks difficult, and what teachers tell us is that the reaction they're getting now is, hey, I don't want any part of this. I don't even know how to start. How do I switch the screen? This is basically where the reaction is coming from. So all of these things do form patterns in the brain. They're actually connections. Connectivity is what we call it. technically, and the connectivity between the cells and between the brain areas is set up to a great extent during childhood and adolescence. And although, we can still keep working on our brains throughout a lifetime, it happens a lot faster then, and we do have these critical or sensitive periods when we need to be doing certain kinds of things. And what the research suggests strongly is that young children particularly, and I have put the limit on computer use at age 7. I don't think kids normally developing children under age 7 really have much business spending much time at all, if any, on computers. And I think it's absurd to be putting them into nursery school. In fact, I think it's damaging for many reasons to put them in nursery school and kindergarten and even first grade. I think, we should be putting our money into the older kids' technology budgets, because that's where we're beginning to see some research saying that it can do some good. So anyhow, the little kids, what do they need to be doing? They need to be manipulating sand and clay and water and blocks and having fun with people and imagining. There is some suggestion in the research that too much use of certain kinds of software may dull a kid's imagination. It may reduce his creativity. It may reduce something that we technically call ideation, which means his ability to create pictures and ideas and inventions inside his own mind, because he's so wedded to pushing a button and seeing something on the screen that is jazzy and fun and it moves fast and attracts his attention, that he suddenly isn't practicing in his own brain the ability to do this. So there are just a whole lot of reasons developmentally why too much of the wrong kind of media, be it any kind of television, any kind of computers, software, internet, games, you name it, especially if an adult isn't involved and the kid's just going along by himself, can be either actively harmful to the brain, or it can take time away from what he really needs to be doing with his brain at that age.
Well, and I used to think coloring inside the lines in coloring books was detrimental. We've certainly come a long way from that.
No, that isn't even an issue anymore.
Exactly.
Now they point to it and click, and it becomes red.
Exactly.
Or they point to the sky and click a few times, and they've got a sky full of stars. And and we wonder why they have attention problems, because, what do you learn by taking a piece of paper when you're 6 years old and deciding you want a starry sky? First of all, drawing the stars. It's a laborious process, which might even be called boring. But you watch a child who has not been able to do this with a computer program, you watch them do it, they're not bored. This is their creation, and they're proud of it. Plus, what does it teach them? It teaches them, first of all, eye-hand control, which is going to the brain and it's setting up patterns that we don't even really understand, but that some way deeply have to do with learning. It's giving them a sense of persistence and success and accomplishment and sticking with a task and paying attention to it. All of these are things that we now are putting kids on drugs because they can't do. Where did this all come from? But yet you put a child on a computer program when he's 5 or 6 years old and let him stamp in every star in 2 minutes, and you may have gained a glitzy printout, but what have you lost there in terms of this child's mental development? There's plenty of place for new skills, and these children will learn technology. You can learn technology at any age. The technology they're going to be using is very different from what they're using now. Learning what we have now isn't doing them any good whatsoever. It's just detracting from their intelligence, as far as I can see it.
So what you're saying then is the computer and the television has been, because children have been so lethargic, sitting in front of it has created children who are bored because they don't know what else to do?
Well, very often, but it's even more than that, you see, because these media, TV and computers even are actually, parents think they're better, but they actually can be worse, simply because they hook the kid in even more powerfully than television does. but they're actively doing things to mental channels, and we do not adequately understand what those things are. But we know enough to suspect that they may not always be good for attention, for motivation, for language, for reading, for all kinds of things.
All right. Now, how you said that obesity was somehow related to kids in front of the television. How does obesity play into this?
Well, there are two things, basically. One is that the child is inactive, and the child's body really needs to be out moving spontaneously, and therefore he's not burning the same number of calories. The second, of course, is that even programs for kids as young as the Teletubbies set are advertising junk food. And, you know, fatty hamburgers and things that tend to make children heavier. And then without the exercise that's a normal part of childhood to go along with that, you're basically seeing a rather dramatic increase in childhood obesity and related disorders. You're also seeing an increase in depression, in attention problems, in children taking medications for all kinds of issues which may or may not be a function of this kind of a lifestyle. You know, there are a lot of things for which kids legitimately need to take medicine, but it seems in this country we're way out of line in how many drugs we feed to our children.
Now, you talked about the fact that children sitting in front of the television for long periods of time without conversation, without interaction with adults, and just literally sitting there. Does this lead, do you think, to the kinds of things that we have been seeing with teenagers where they are constantly trying to do feats that are way over the boundaries, so to speak? Does this lethargy of sitting in front of the television and computer somehow equate to their needing this overstimulation to bring the body back into balance?
That's a good question, and I don't think we know the answer to that at a scientific level because nobody's really looked that deep at it. But I would also say that it may be that they have been so overstimulated by all the electronic toys and the fast-paced stuff that go. I mean, I talk a lot about this in my book, Endangered Minds. The fast pace of even what is thought to be good children's television programs, like Sesame Street, for example. It can really do a number on kids' attention systems, in my opinion, because they accustom them to this high level of stimulus. So you've got to keep going higher and higher and higher, and that also could be the reason. So, you know, there could be several different factors here. But I think what we know for sure is that things are changing, and we need to take a look at this. We need to look at what's right for the kids, and we need to look at what's right in terms of the skills and the mental habits they're going to need when they go out into this technological world. It's just insane to be, first of all, dumping onto children a lot of products just by the products, just because they sound good, when they may harm them. And secondly, it's insane to be running schools that aren't thinking about these issues and are still expecting the same kinds of stuff that was successful 150 years ago.
Now, we have only a few minutes left in our broadcast. What would you consider the focus that you would like to leave our listening audience with in a positive way to help alleviate a lot of what, actually we had Jane on our first half hour who was talking about, Joan Almon, who was talking about the increase in the last few years of nervousness and stress, allergies and asthma, hyperactivity and depression, and now autism and violence. What would you tell our listening audience might be the direction to go in order to help alleviate, give them some practical things to do?
I would say that we need to think about the kids. We desperately need to worry about their needs and not worry so much about the products that we're purchasing for them and whether we have the latest technology. We need to be in touch with how much time they're spending on these various media, both television and computers. And teachers need to consider very carefully how they spend their money on computers. And we need to think most of all about what age is right. We need to ask the question, what time should I bring these things into my child's life? And maybe just because it's there doesn't mean it's going to be good for him or her.
You have been listening to Children Come First. We have had two guests in our audience today. In our program today. They have been Joan Almon, who's with the Alliance for Children. You can reach her if you'd like, toll free at 888-878-2772. That's toll free 888-878-2772. And we've also been with Jane Healey today. Jane is the author of two books, Endangered Minds, Why Our Children Don't Think, and the second, Failure to Connect, How Computers Affect Our Children's Minds for Better or for Worse. Jane, do you have an email address or a website for people to look up any information on you?
Well, frankly, I'm sort of a private person, and I don't give out my email address.
Okay.
But they can certainly contact me by writing to my publisher, which is Simon & Schuster, Touchstone Paperbacks, or just go online or to a bookstore and buy either Endangered Minds or Failure to Connect, and you'll find out all about me on the back cover.
And we want to thank our listening audience today. If you'd like to reach us at any time, you may call us at 877-PRO-KIDS, that's 877-PROKIDS, or you may email us at PROKIDS, PROKIDS, that's PROKIDS at RLC.net, that's PROKIDS, PROKIDS at RLC.net. We look forward to our next program, when we will be speaking with many interesting people like we had today. We want to thank Jane Healey for taking the time out to be with us today.
You're very welcome.
We greatly appreciate it in your busy schedule, I know, touring the country with your book tour. And Joan Almon at the Alliance for Children, if you'd like to find out information, you may call us at any time, and we would be happy to disseminate it for you. Have a wonderful day, and make sure you hug your children. Thank you.